Hi, I'm Casey Kaufhold, Olympic team member and World Cup team member for the United States, and I'm here to show you how I set up my indoor recurve bow. Some of my equipment here, I have the Hoyt XI riser, I have my Velos limbs, I shoot medium 42s, I have a Excel Achieve XP sight, biter plunger, D-cut little aperture here. I shoot ABB string, 16 strands and 68 inches. I have some stabilizers here. I shoot the Smackdown from Conquest and some X10 arrows. Some of the tools to help you set up today will be a T-square to measure brace height, knocking point, and tiller. I have a biter wrench here for the plunger, some serving, lighter, knife, some biter limb aligners, wrenches, and a bowstringer. First, we have to put it all together. Some people might do this process and the tuning process a little different. This is just how I do it. So first, start with the limbs, got the bottom limb here. Make sure it clicks, top limb. All right, then next is the string. The larger loop out of the two ends always goes on top. So that larger one on first and get the bottom one. Next, after the string is on, we get to string the bow. I'm using a homemade stringer, but Hoyt sells one, and I'm sure anywhere at your local archery shop there would be one as well. So I just put 2 loops on, make sure it's all straight. Then you're gonna step on the stringer, pull up, and I like to use my knee for leverage here, just to pull it a little bit more. And then you'll put that top loop around the ledge in the limb. And then I just like to double check, make sure everything is in there securely, nothing's hanging off the side. And then I give it a little bit of a pull and just make sure it's all set. Next, I continue setting up my bow by putting the sight on. I like to have it on the 3rd setting. Some people like it in farther or out more. It really depends on personal preference, but I always have it on the 3rd setting. Then I put my aperture on. Make sure it's nice and in the center. I do my plunger. I'm using a biter. And to make sure it's down really tight, I use the little wrench here. Just goes into the side, tightens it down. Next, I put my bars on. Most people have their V-bar mounted to the bow. I do it a little different. I have a little bit of threading here that I put the bars on. And for me, this is just faster. It sets up really easily, and it's easy for me to adjust like the height of it if I need to, if it's sideways at all. So it just pretty much stays on there from the tension on the front bar. And now we're ready to get started. The first step I do in tuning is align the limbs. To do that, I use the biter blocks here and a set of wrenches. So first, I put the blocks on the limb. I like to start them at the bottom and make sure they're square and slide them up. I do like maybe 2.5 inches above where the pocket is here. I like to line it up with the middle of the H on the Hoyt limb. It's just a good reference for me. So I'll do that on the top and the bottom. So if we line up the string with the middle of our limb aligners and also the string with the stabilizer, we can tell if the limbs are off to the left or to the right. So I'm gonna stand square to the bow and lining up the stabilizer with the string and then looking at the limbs here. I can see that on this top limb, there's a little bit of a gap between the string and the gauge on the right. And if I look at the bottom limb, there's a little bit of a gap between the string and the gauge on the left side. Starting with the top limb, You'll always loosen the side that has the gap between the string and the gauge. So again, there's a gap on the right side of the top limb. So I'm gonna loosen the right side of this limb pocket here, just a little bit. I'll do about half turn. And then you'll always do the opposite to the other side. So I'm gonna tighten this left side here. And that should push the gap so it's more in line. So let's look at it. Now that top limb is all centered up. So looking at the bottom limb here, again, lining the string up with the stabilizer and seeing it in reference to the gauge, there is a gap on the left. So again, when there's a gap, you'll loosen the side of the limb pocket with the gap. So just a little bit at a time. It's about a half turn, and then tighten it on the opposite side. And then always check after you move it. There's still a little bit of a gap on the left, so I'm gonna do the same thing just with a smaller turn. So I'll do about a quarter turn on the bottom, and then tighten it up all the way on the right. Check it again. Now the bottom limb looks in line. So after I do each one individually, I like to look at them both in comparison to the stabilizer, just to make sure they're all in line and it looks good. After I do my limb alignment, the next thing I check is my center shot. So for a left-handed archer like I am, your arrow lined up when you look down the bow, it shouldn't be exactly lined up with the stabilizer. It should be slightly out to the right, and that just counteracts how it pushes into the cushion plunger once you let go of the string. So for, like I said, for a left-handed archer, mine will be slightly off to the right of center, and for a right-handed archer, it'll be the opposite. So your arrow point will be slightly off to the left from center. My center shot is already set, but if you would need to move it on the biter plunger here, there are just these little set screws. You would take those out, and then if you needed to push it more to the right, you would back this out so it screws in more to the bow and pushes it to the right. If it's too far out to the right and you need to take it back, you'll just screw this in more so then not as much of the threading goes through the riser. And then it would be, as I said, opposite for a right-handed archer. So before I put new knocking points on, I'm gonna cut my old ones off. To do that, I have a pocket knife here, and it's pretty sharp. You want a pretty sharp knife that's a little bit thinner, that way you can get a close cut. You don't wanna have a super rough angle on the string because you don't wanna cut any of the the string serving, you just wanna cut the knocking points. So the way I like to do it, I just have a tiny bit of an angle and I kind of come at it sideways and just slowly go back and forth, and it should cut that right off. The next step is setting your knocking points. So for that, you'll need a T-square, some serving. I'm using BCY serving, a knife, a lighter, and an arrow. So I have 2 pieces here already cut. And first I'm gonna take my T-square and clip it on the string and then set it so it's just barely resting on the arrow rest there. So for me, I usually like to have my bottom knocking point set anywhere from 3/8 to a 1/4 inch up on even. Now even on a T-square would be this bottom line here, because that would be if the arrow was exactly lined up with the rest. So I like mine just a little bit high, so I'm gonna take my first piece here and I'm gonna tie it, we'll start 3/8 up. So I'm just gonna take and do a very simple knot, just over under, and then I like to do my first set of knocking points before I tune a little bit loose. That way if I need to move them, I can just twist them without having to cut them and retie them a whole bunch. So I just tighten it down a little bit, not a whole lot, and then double check and make sure it lines up with that measurement you like. After that, I'll take the T-square off, and then I'll continue doing my knots. So I'm gonna loop below the string and then just tighten it a tad. And I do the knots on the same side of the string every time. So if I start on the top of the string, I'll do my next knot on the top of the string as well. And then when you go to do each knot, for the bottom knocking point, you'll wanna go down the string. That way you're not covering up the part of the string where the knock will clip on. So you wanna keep going down for the bottom one, and then when we do the top one, you'll go up the string. So I usually do 3 to 4 knots. I think I'll just do 3 for this one. That way it's easier to move if I have to. And so same thing, loop below the string and then tie a knot above the string. And then just tighten it down a little bit. I kind of just move it a tad with my thumb, make sure it's able to move. So after I tighten that last knot, I'll take my knife and cut off the excess string. Just leave a little bit left, that way when we burn it with the lighter, it'll kind of ball up and you can kind of stick it down to the string. That way there won't be that leftover hanging out. So take our lighter here. I always, whenever I do my knocking points and burn them at the end, I keep the end I'm gonna burn pointing up. That way the flame doesn't burn any of the serving on the string. Burn a little bit, and then I just use my thumb and kind of push it down. That way it's nice and neat. Do the same thing with the other one. And you've done one knocking point. So next you'll do your top knocking point, and to do that, you'll take one of your arrows. So I put my arrow nice and tight against that bottom knocking point, and we're gonna put the top one just right above that arrow with a little bit of room between the two to move the knock, but not a whole lot because you don't want it sliding up and down the string. So I'm gonna take my other piece of serving here, start with 1 knot, and again, I'm doing these a little looser than I usually would. That way, if I need to move them while I'm tuning, I can. So just make sure there's just a tiny bit of room. You don't want a whole lot, just enough so it's not like really pressing on the knock. So start with 1 knot, and again, you'll just loop it and then tie on the same side you started. I'm gonna do 1 more. Then you can take the arrow off and then cut that excess off like we did on the first one. And then burn those ends down. And that's how you do knocking points. Now it's time to set your brace height and tiller measurements. So for me, I usually like my brace height anywhere between 8 5/8 and 8 3/4. Just personal preference with the bow I shoot and how I like the shot to feel. For my tiller, I like it anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 up on the top limb. So first, I'm checking my brace height here. So right now, my brace height is set where I like it at 8 3/4, but if you were to change it, you would de-string the bow and put twists into the string to make it higher, because that makes the string shorter, which bends the limbs more, which will increase this distance here. Or to make the brace height lower, you would take twists out, which makes the string longer, decreasing the length between the string and the grip. So for tiller, my tiller, I usually like it at 1/8 of an inch up on the top. Right now it's 1/4 of an inch difference, so I am gonna make the bottom limbs measurement a little bit higher. So I'm gonna set my T-square down for now, and I'm gonna take my Allen wrenches here. So if I wanna make this bottom measurement higher, I'm gonna loosen the bolts. So just gonna do that set screw there, just take it out a little bit, and then I'm gonna take this limb bolt here. I'm just gonna take it out just a tiny bit. I'll start with a little more than 1/4 turn, and then grab my T-square and measure it again. So now it's at 7. And this one is at 7 1/8. So that would be where I like it, at a 7 1/8, or at 1/8 of an inch up on the top. So having that tiller a little bit greater on the top limb will just help the limbs react when you shoot the bow. When you're at full draw, you have that really rough string angle from where the string's in your hands. And so having it a little bit greater on the top just helps the arrow fly better coming out of the bow once you release. So before you start shooting, going back to the plunger, I like to have it set at the medium tension. So on the biter plunger, there's like little numbers in the threading of it when you tighten it or loosen it. And I like to have mine set at 5, just that way I know how much I move it, either stiffen it or weaken it from that midpoint. So now it's time to shoot. I'm here at 18 meters and I'm gonna shoot 2 fletched arrows and just see where they go on the target. I can move my sight if I have to. And then I'm gonna shoot my bear shaft and see where it goes in reference to those fletched arrows. So I shot my first 2 arrows and they weren't in the center yet, so I'm gonna shoot a couple more fletched ones till I get a really good sight mark in the center. Now that I've got a good group, I'll shoot the bear shaft. Now let's walk down and see where they're at. So looking at my shots here, we can kind of see a little bit of a pattern. I started out shooting high. These were my first 3 shots. So I moved my sight a little bit and then I was shooting more center. And then here I shot my bear shaft, which it's pretty good left and right. It would be about in line with the right side of the 10, which is good, but it's a little bit high. So that's showing that the knocking point right now is low, meaning it's low, so the angle is gonna shoot the arrow high. So we're gonna move the knocking point up and hopefully that'll even out the height a little bit. So since my bear shaft was high, we need to move the knocking point up a little bit. And so to do that, I tied my knocking points a little loose at the beginning so I can twist them. So right now, my bottom one is at 3/8 up from even. So I'm gonna twist that so it's up. We'll try a quarter up from even first, and if we need to move it more or less, we can change it. So now I'm gonna twist this bottom knocking point up. To do that, I'm gonna twist it clockwise so it moves up the string. And that's about 3 twists there, and then I'll do the same thing with the top one. So I'm just gonna put this knock on here, make sure it fits. It has a little too much play in it, so I'm gonna move that top one back down, so I'll twist it counterclockwise and should have a little less of a gap. And now I'm just gonna measure and make sure that it moved to a 1/4 inch up. And when you line it up, you can see that this one here is about a 1/4 inch up from even. So now that I've moved my knocking point up a little bit, I'm gonna shoot more fletched arrows, and if I need to move my sight, I can. And then once they're grouping well, I'll shoot another bear shaft. Pretty good. So now that I've moved my knocking point, we can see how the sight changed a little bit. Since we moved that knocking point up, the angle of the arrows would come down. So my fletched arrows started out a little low. As I moved my sight, they got more center. And then when I shot my bear shaft, it was right where we need it to be in the X. So one more thing with bear shaft tuning is the left and right of where the bear shaft lands. For me, mine didn't have very much left and right play, but say for a left-handed archer like me, if I had my arrow, my bear shaft hit like right 8-7 line, that would mean that the arrows are a little stiff. And so to make them move more towards center, I would weaken the plunger, which would be taking like a couple of clicks or maybe even a turn, depending on how far it is out of the plunger. And so for a right-handed archer, that would be opposite. Say their bear shaft would land on the right side of the target, that would mean it was weak, so they would have to stiffen their plunger. For me, I didn't have to do that with this bow, but depending on how you set it up and just what all the specs are, you may have to change that. So this is just how I tune my indoor recurve setup. My main goal is just to get the bear shafts flying well and make them similar to where the fletched arrows land. It may be different how you do it, and I hope you learned something new. If you did learn something new, comment it down below, and please like this video, and thank you for joining us today.